Okay, Dr. Janus Adams is with us, and I'm very excited to have her. I've also had some recent conversations with her that were just very inspiring, and I actually learned a lot. Um, we're going to talk a little bit about the story of Black Wall Street. As many of you all know, just with the recent racial unrest, that many of you all might have heard about the Tulsa riots that happened back in the early part of the century, 1920 or somewhere around there. Not sure. And actually, that's embarrassing that I don't know that right off the top of my head. But this story is really critical. And it's important for us to realize why this story is relevant today. So this is why we've invited Dr. Janus Adams. And what we're going to do for the next 15 or 20 minutes is we're going to do kind of a conversation, me and Dr. Adams, about Black Wall Street. And so before we get started, Dr. Adams, would you like to introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, everybody. I'm Janus Adams. I'm delighted to be here. This is my first virtual conference as a speaker, so this is instructive to me. I'm actually, with all of this virtual, I don't know where anybody is anymore. I just know they're in Zoom land. And I kind of like that because I'm getting to, with all of this, I think on the positive side, we're getting to see and meet people that we otherwise wouldn't, even at a conference. You just don't get the kind of intimacy you do here. And I think you get a whole different level of caring about one another as a result that I'm happy to participate in. I want to thank Marianne Howland for introducing me to the group and bringing me to the attention of Derek Peebles. I see her over there. I don't know where she is on your screen, but hi, Marianne. I'm an author and historian. I also publish the backpackskids.com series. And these days, as I have been kind of rethinking my crossroads, I've come to a certain kind of reckoning on saying, so who are you? Where have you always been? And how are you going to define what you're going to do next? And my theme, I realized, had been, but it was now time for me to acknowledge that it is history and healing. That it is looking at the history that we've had, but also figuring out how we come through that. And that's not just sociological or cultural, it's everything that we do. And so that is one of the things that kind of brought us into this conversation from the conversation that Derek and I were having, and in terms of how we could translate some of the things that I've learned from history, and I say history meaning everything, especially business, as well as women's history, global African experience, and what that really means to lessons that are absolutely about sustainability, absolutely about making a way out of no way, absolutely about overcoming odds and obstacles and learning to believe in oneself and to project oneself into the universe when other people would rather have it otherwise. And I think no matter of color, that is something that every small business owner kind of identifies with in unique ways. So proceeding from there, Derek?
Sure. So Black Wall Street. Why are we just now hearing about this? And Black Wall Street has always been relevant to me because it's the one story where I've heard that there was actually a time in our history where we had Black millionaires and where we had a Black thriving economy where the dollar circulated 100 times before it left that community. You had Black lawyers, you had Black doctors, you had Black business owners. And what we know loosely about the Tulsa riots is about the fall of Black Wall Street. We know about we've heard about the Tulsa riots And actually, if you all don't know, it's the only period in our history where a state government in the United States dropped bombs on American citizens and tore the neighborhood up and ran all of the Black people, wealthy Black people, out of Tulsa. But we don't really know much about the rise of Black Wall Street. And so I thought this would be a good, something that you could share with us, Dr. Adams, because why would this story be relevant to us today?
Well, it's relevant because it is a story of success. That's why we're going to talk about it today. I'll give you very quickly the backdrop. On May 30th, 1921, Greenwood, which was the name of this section of Tulsa, Oklahoma, it was home to a city of Black strivers, and it stood tall on May 30th, 1921. 2 days later, it was a smoldering rubble, hundreds murdered in what is considered the worst race riot in the history of the United States, as white marauders, backed by local government, took to the streets in rage, leaving bodies, many decapitated, tarred and feathered, burned alive in their wake, and 10,000 people were left homeless. That's what happened to Black Wall Street. The cause of it is clear: lies, racism, jealousy, resentment. But to speak about Black Wall Street that way is like speaking to a person's success only in terms of the fact that someone killed them. And it's so much more than that. Black Wall Street, when we look at it, why is it important today? Because it is the story, it brings with it lessons of how we might climb out from the ashes of COVID, out from the ashes, not so much of racial unrest, because the United States has always been unrestful when it comes to race. The very fact that we have racism is unrestful. The comment was made about the common good, and that is absolutely important. But we have to understand as well that the United States has never dealt with the common good. The common good has been excised by means of racism, by means of sexism, by means of homophobia. We have deliberately crafted a way that we don't talk about the common good. So here we're going to take one story about people who decided to create their own common good. These are people, some of whom had been free people of color before emancipation, some of whom were emancipated in 1865. This is what is leading up to 1920 to 1921. Then there was the Freedmen's Bureau Bank, and literally Black people newly emancipated were encouraged to put all their money into that bank. That bank became so successful that it was taken over by a group of white people who literally robbed the bank blind. Frederick Douglass was brought in to see if he could rescue it, but it was too late. It had already been done. All the money was lost to all those Black people. And still, by 1895, you have business groups that are coming together. They create something. One of the stories I love about it is the George Leary. It was a steamship that came about because it was a way to counteract segregation. And it sailed from Norfolk, Virginia to Washington, D.C. It was a state-of-the-art steamship by Black business owners who created this vessel so that people would not be herded into these cattle cars that were beginning to come into effect in the name of segregation, and that they could have their own businesses. That kind of ingenuity all around the country is what leads up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to manifesting in what would become Black Wall Street. One other comment that I want to make very quickly, Derek, you said there are other times when the U.S. government has acted to destroy communities of color. More recently, it happened in Philadelphia with the bombing of the MOVE organization right in Philadelphia. But traditionally,
Right.
air bombing, Tulsa was the only time that we think of, because the plane is new, and the ability to have a plane come in and do that, World War I technology was new, but the disruption of Black people is not new. And still they forge this community. What does that have to do with you? We are going through some horrific times right now. A lot of people being out of work, a lot of businesses closing. And the question is, how can we take the lessons of rising from the ashes to create our own success? And in that is that turn a dollar 3 times. In that is the coming together of otherwise disparate parts of the economy. In that is believing in yourself as the expert, because frankly, we as small business owners, we so often look to saying, well, like if I only had an MBA, or something like that. Some people will say, well, let's face it, an MBA trains people to work in Fortune 500, in fact, Fortune 100 is the aspiration, America. That's what it's training for. And anybody who has dealt with a Fortune 100 company versus a small business knows the financial documents alone that they talk about in a Fortune 500 or 100 company are extraneous to some extent to a small business that knows that the most important document is cash flow. So we take these lessons of respecting ourselves, of maximizing the things that we know better than anybody else about who our communities are and how to reach them. We take that intrinsic ear to the ground knowledge of, or willing to learn what our neighbors need, and we bring that to what we need to do today.
Thank you for sharing that. I recently watched the movie Watchmen, and it made me kind of sick. And what hope can you give us as we begin to depart for the day? And what kind of things should we be thinking about in relation of Black Wall Street? Because, we don't want history to repeat itself.
History not repeating itself begins with our not being afraid to know history.
Mm.
And so that's where we begin. We begin with that acknowledgement. We begin with confronting it. We begin within our own way, whatever it is, atoning for it. And it's not just Black history. We cannot not acknowledge Indigenous history. And frankly, that history is what was done to that community in Tulsa is really the bedrock that we talk to. What happened to Native American communities that opened the way for a Tulsa. But in that, we then look to ourselves and say, that's the past. We see it. We really do understand how we got there.
Mm.
I'm going to make a quick aside because it had me sick all day yesterday, that somebody put up $1 million for Derek Chauvin to go free.
Yeah.
which is no different than when people applauded when Emmett Till's murderers went free. We are at a dangerous time in the United States where we are in danger of repeating that history. But let us understand that when we repeat that history, we are also saying we're willing to repeat our own inadequacy.
Mm.
And if we're not willing to repeat our inadequacy, then that means that we have to own our strength and our power, own our humility, and own our greatness.
Mm.
And I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. That was very powerful. And I could see in the chat that just thank you. That's all I can really say. This is a really powerful story. I don't usually give endorsements, but if you haven't seen the movie The Watchmen, I'd suggest you watch it. That because somebody asked about resources about learning about Black Wall Street. Let's start with that movie because I thought it was very good. It's gut-wrenching, but it is good if you could stomach it. So we are at the end of day one.